All right, as everybody, as the rest of the participants get added to this Zoom webinar, thank you so much for joining us. I am really excited about the webinar that we've got for you all today. My name is Brandon Dempsey. I'm one of the owners of Go Brand Go and also one of the founders for the Conflux. Conflux will be the nation's first co-learning center for manufacturing and distribution companies, and being launched largely by myself and another gentleman, Derek Weber. As a part of launching the Conflux, we're planning on moving in hopefully this summer. That's probably going to be delayed a little bit. But we decided, hey, you know what? With all of the COVID-19 and everybody working from home, the whole purpose behind the Conflux was to bring together connections and content. And we thought, what better time to just launch some of the content series. So a few years ago, I got to meet the man you guys are going to get to meet here in a second, Gabor, Burt. And I sat on a 3-day facilitated exercise of Gabor facilitating an organization to help them reimagine themselves into a blue ocean strategy and how to transform that organization. Gabor has worked with many Fortune 100 companies and whatnot. And I've had the pleasure of staying in touch with him. When I reached out to him and we talked a little bit about the opportunity for this webinar, we discussed what amazing content this could be for some of our network. So Gabor has agreed to, for free, come and share a lot of his resources and knowledge that he brings to big companies when they're either going through crisis and they need to pivot, sound familiar, or they're getting their butts kicked in the current competitive landscape and space, and they need to make a change, and they need to change how they go to market. And he's going to walk us through some different frameworks and ideas of how these companies have pivoted inside their existing marketplace to better serve existing customers, but also how they visualize and create and pivot to serve net new customers that they weren't able to attract before. And I think this is just going to be super relevant information for what companies are going through today as all of us navigate these crazy times of COVID-19. As we go throughout the webinar, Gabor is going to be running the majority of it. If you have questions, go ahead and post them in the questions and answer session. I'll answer questions. If they're a quick answer, I'll answer them. If they're questions for Gabor, we're going to save them at the end, and then we'll run through them. Then we do have a little bit of interaction today with some different polls that we're going to do as well that we'll be asking. So hopefully we'll keep your attention and keep you off email. So without further ado, Gabor, share your screen and take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Brandon, and greetings to everyone who is joining us. I'm very happy to spend this time with you. So these are absolutely extraordinary times, no doubt about it. And what I am going to share with you are the concepts, I think, that will allow you to turn adversity into opportunity. And this is in no way to diminish or downplay the severity of the situation we're facing. In fact, quite the opposite. It will allow you to confront it, to have a firm foundation, and to be able to master it rather than be victimized by it. So what I like to do is present with you, immerse you. I think we have about an hour together in the key concepts that I think will enable you to be empowered and take control. So with that, let me then start. So here it is. So our topic is turning crisis into opportunity. Yes, indeed. That is our aim. That is what we want to talk about. So the good place to start, I think, is just this kind of odd fact. About 100 years ago, this strange contraption was invented. It was called the isolator. And what the inventor had in mind is to create a contraption that would allow a person to be focused on a single task and to get rid of all outside distractions. And I think it's kind of an interesting contrast to the predicament that we're facing today, which is artificial isolation, abrupt isolation imposed on us. And the question is, how do we stay connected? How do we stay relevant? How do we stay active during this time? So let's start out with a poll. So I'm curious about your thinking and how you view what we're going through right now. And so you have 3 options. And Brandon, if you would put the poll up. If you had to choose between these 3, great. If you had to choose between these 3, so what is your view? Which of these answers best represents what you're thinking? That this is a passing period, things will get back to normal. That's one option. Second is to say that no, there's a new normal on the horizon and it's mostly full of dangers and risks, or this new normal is mostly full of all kinds of new opportunities. So I'm curious what your feeling is at the moment. Which of these three best exemplifies your perspective? So if you had to choose, let's see the results. If perhaps everyone has already filled it out.
Yep. So we have for what is the current view of the crisis, we have 18% saying answer number one, current crisis is temporary. 5% giving the current crisis is creating a new normal full of dangers, and 77% saying the current crisis is creating a new normal full of opportunities.
Very good, though. Thank you for that. And it's interesting. We have a slightly larger percentage of people than my previous webinars thinking that this is going to get back to normal, and slightly less people saying that it's full of dangers mostly. So of course it's a third mindset where we want to be at, and it's probably easy to think, or we want ourselves to think and believe that there's the poll results that's the right answer. But let's now really understand why that is, and to empower you to really be able to deliver on this perspective. So I love this observation by Paul Romer, who is a Nobel Prize American economist, who says a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, which is a great starting point for us, because that's exactly the kind of thinking that we should adapt. And let's look at a couple of companies that have done that have taken advantage of crisis to really take what they're doing to a whole new level. One of these is, of course, FedEx, which was started in the mid-1970s in the midst of the oil embargo and oil crisis, and the whole economic downturn that was the result. So it was started exactly in that period. And imagine a business in which the key component, the key cost, doubles overnight, which for them was fuel. But this did not stop FedEx. In fact, this sort of challenge made them that much more efficient, that much more adaptable and resilient. And of course, it led to them forming this foundation that is now the reason that they're able to dominate an entire industry. A second example is Nintendo. You may not know that Nintendo was actually launched in the 19th century as a gaming card company. And through their life, they went through many iterations. For a while, they had a hotel chain, they ran taxis, they had a television entertainment division. And it wasn't really until the 1980s that they got into the area which they're dominant on, right, which is video gaming with Donkey Kong. And of course, this is a company that is immersed in practicing blue ocean strategy, but their whole mentality and philosophy is resilience and adaptability, which allowed them to conquer many crises along the way. An even better example is that of Nokia. So Nokia is a 150-year-old company, which through their history at one time made rubber boots and rifles. And it's an example that I use with companies to say, imagine that you woke up one morning and your most important market, your most important customer was gone, no longer existed. That is an all-out crisis. And the question is, how could you not just survive that crisis, but take your company to a whole new level of success? And this is exactly what happened to Nokia in 1991, when the Soviet Union almost overnight dissolved as an economic entity. And at that time, that was Nokia's biggest market by far, where they were selling paper and wood manufactured products. But within 3 years, the company completely divested all of its manufacturing assets and was listed on the New York Stock Exchange as the premier mobile telecom company. That took them less than 3 years to do, to completely change directions. Now, a fun example of a product that was born during crisis is Nutella. The story goes that in the 1950s, there was a great shortage of everything in Europe after World War II, and the chocolate was especially expensive. So the makers of Nutella, Ferrero, substituted hazelnut for Nutella, and the rest is history. It became one of the most popular treats, even breakfast foods of all time, and still is today. And finally, Groupon. Groupon was born in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008, when people had very little disposable income, were really looking to economize. So Groupon brought it an opportunity to give customers a way to save money, but also have new experiences. And on the other side, it gave local retailers the opportunity to reconnect with customers following the crises. So based on those examples, let's now just summarize the key points that I would like to share with you: the logic, the mindset, the approach that you can adopt regardless of what industry you are in or what type of company you are, what size company you are. Number one is this idea that you should view the current crisis as a form of extreme disruption. We know this concept of disruption, and we know that it has been around for a while. And by phrasing the current crisis as extreme disruption, we bring it within the realm of normal and understand that this is not a one-time phenomena, but this is actually part of the new normal. And that's a really important distinction, because once it's within our realm of understanding and normal, we then can have a way of dealing with it. Building on that is to adopt what I call a mindset of perpetual crisis, understanding that these kind of events happen continuously and constantly. I would even say that there is a certain cadence to major crises. So in the 1970s, there was the oil crisis. In the 1980s, at the end of the decade, was the fall of communism, which set in motion a whole new world order economically and politically. Of course, in 2001, we had 9/11. In 2008, we had the financial crisis, and now we have a healthcare crisis. So on average, every 12 to 13 years, a major crisis, of course, different and very unique, happens. But the idea of a crisis should be one that we look at as something part of our operating environment, and therefore we want to adopt a mindset of perpetual crisis for ourselves. Number three, understand and apply this wonderful resource, which is abundant, completely free, and extremely powerful in terms of dealing with and empowering us in an environment of perpetual crisis. And that's our creativity, both on an individual level and on an organizational level. In other words, understanding its power throughout our entire company. Once we do that, then we want to understand how to channel that. So it's not an abstract concept. It's not about brainstorming where everybody's generating ideas, but understand how to systematically channel the use of creativity in order to get you to the point where you are maximizing on the new opportunities presented by the crisis and in the post-crisis environment. And for that, I will present to you the Slingshot framework as one such systematic structure for channeling creativity. Once we have that structure, then what we want to do is really apply it to our current key challenges, which is how do we pivot? How do we identify those new opportunities immediately and for the post-crisis environment in a way that minimizes our resource utilization, that allows us to continue to employ our staff and use the assets that we have without having to quickly and significantly cut back on them. And then lastly, to understand that this is an opportunity to take advantage of, not just within our current business space, but to look beyond, to expand outward, to look at our entire environment, the community at large, and to create those relationships that will be the foundation for our business going forward. So these are the 6 steps. And what I like to do is now kind of immerse you in them a little bit deeper. So the first idea is this notion of viewing the current crisis as extreme disruption. So we have had this term around this acronym for several years now, VUCA, that we live in a VUCA world, which is the perfect cocktail of these adverse conditions swirling around our business. So V stands for volatility, U is for uncertainty, C is for complexity, and A is for adversity. So this is our environment. So a major crisis like this comes along, it's still part of the normal, the new normal that VUCA brings to us, and the idea of continuous disruption. So to illustrate how best to confront this new normal of continuous disruption and crisis, I use the analogy of this parable about 3 tourists and a lion in Africa. And this video was shared with you. Perhaps you saw it, so I'll quickly summarize. The story is about 3 tourists who are walking along in Africa on a safari, and all of a sudden, a ferocious lion jumps out from behind the bushes in front of them. The lion is very near. It's growling. It's showing its fangs. It's ready to pounce. Its intentions are very clear. In response to this sudden crisis, the first tourist freezes, paralyzed with fear, completely unable to move. The second tourist immediately starts to take off any access equipment. So his equipment belt, binoculars, machete, water bottle, sweater, backpack. While the third tourist is still calmly looking, assessing the situation with his hand in his pocket. After a few more moments, the first tourist, still unable to move just from the corner of his eye, looks at the second tourist and asks, "What do you think you're doing? There's no way you can outrun this lion, no matter how light you are, how much of your stuff you get rid of." And the second tourist says, "You're right, but it's not the lion I have to outrun. It's at least one of the 2 of you," right? And the third tourist, after a couple more seconds, takes out a lighter, lights it, and the flame scares away the lion. So those are really the 3 principal ways we can react to crises. The first tourist, of course, is completely caught off guard and is paralyzed, has no chance of any sort of reaction, and is therefore in an extremely vulnerable position. The second tourist is somewhat better, but he's only thinking about survival. And the problem with that is that he's getting rid of all kinds of equipment and assets that may be necessary for him to be in a successful position later on. And the third tourist is, of course, where we want to play, where a crisis kicks into high gear our creativity, and we come up with a new move, a new solution that allows us to master the situation and put us in control. And kind of a funny, interesting anecdote to this story, which I've been telling for many years, is that it actually happened in real life in Zimbabwe in 2013. You can Google, there's a video of it online, where a photographer from Discovery Channel got way too close to a black rhino, which is one of the most dangerous and powerful animals in the wild. You can see they're barely about 20, 30 feet apart. And at the moment when the rhino started to charge the photographer, he clapped his hands. And that sudden noise scared away the rhino and allowed him to escape. So that's the idea of and the power of the right way of thinking about crisis as extreme disruption and making it the realm so we're comfortable, we don't feel surprised, and we're able to react the proper way. In terms of adopting a mindset of perpetual crisis, well, we know that this is the case, that there is continuous movement in the business environment around us, exemplified by just a couple of quick facts. One is that the average lifespan of companies over the last 100 years has dramatically and continuously decreased, as well as companies are being born and they're being left behind or to seize at really high rate of speed. At the same time, we also know that there are new titans of business who have reached levels of success unheard of before. And here are some of them. And what's interesting is when you consider them all at once is to see the commonalities. Yes, they are all very young. Yes, they can come from different parts of the world. But the most important and most interesting thing to note, especially during a period like this, is that they all disrupted the space that they entered without having any of the infrastructure and the assets that was deemed necessary by the incumbents that they disrupted. And the way they did that is that they leveraged already existing technology. They didn't invent technology. They leveraged that in a way that they understood changing lifestyles and work styles. And by doing that, they applied the new technology to replace and make irrelevant these huge infrastructures that the incumbent companies had. And why this is so significant is that during crisis, when you are devoid of access to resources, or you're looking to minimize your costs, you can look to these kinds of shortcuts to understand how to get into new market spaces by applying already existing technology in new ways. You don't need to build huge and massive infrastructures as demonstrated by these success stories. So when we're thinking about this idea of a mindset of perpetual crisis, a great example is Samsung, one of the top consumer electronic companies in the world, who defines its business not as consumer electronics, but even wider, as life care, which allows them to seamlessly enter new market spaces. And look at what Samsung's CEO says, their perspective. We manage by perpetual crisis. We understand that we must change everything but our family, and that everything that we make will be gone in 10 years. That's the mindset we want to adopt. And by doing this, they are able to get into significant new businesses, 5 of them that you see here, that they were never in before, because they are always in pursuit of new ways they can apply what they know. Another example is McDonald's. And actually, I was able to be part of this entire transformation of the company right before the 2008 crisis, which allowed them to be one of its champions, to really be successful in the wake of the crisis. So before then, McDonald's was all about getting people in and out as fast as possible during meal times. And they saw their business as feeding people. But when we looked at how to transform their business, we ultimately arrived at this idea that their business should be about entertaining people, feeding and entertaining. And this led to a complete restructuring of the entire customer experience and the restaurant facilities. So this is when they introduced the McCafes, introduced the flat screen TVs, free internet, and expanded the areas for children to play. So the idea was to actually capture their customers, not just during meal times, but in between meal times. And of course, in the wake of 2008, when again, people were more frugal, it was really appealing to them to go to a single place where they could eat, where their children could play, where they could do their work and communicate and use the internet, as well as watch news on TV. But again, it's this idea of thinking of yourself in a perpetual state of reinvention and always examining and expanding the boundaries of your business. So the third idea there, building on that, is how do we do that? What is our resource to be able to adopt this mindset and continuously reimagine boundaries? So let's take our second poll about creativity. So I'm curious about your view of creativity. Number one, do you think that creativity is important for your work? Number two, do you consider yourself to be creative? And number three, do you think that your workplace encourages creativity? So these are yes or no. So I'm curious what your answer is for all 3 of these questions, whether you're going to go with a yes or a no.
They're streaming in right now, Gabor. So we're at about 30 completions so far.
Great.
Gabor, that slide about Samsung, considering that their products will be gone in 10 years from now, that was a mind-blowing slide. Like, holy cow, to think that what we're making today will be gone and just having that
Yeah.
constant mindset of you change everything but your family. And I like that quote.
Yeah, and it's really especially powerful coming from such a successful and dominant company to have that attitude. And that's why I also mentioned the McDonald's example, because you could say that McDonald's really has no need to reinvent itself. It's by far the biggest player in its marketplace, but it's still is not content with that. So it's always pushing the boundaries. So any smaller companies, entrepreneurs, I think it's a really inspirational example to see these big companies thinking this way.
Yeah. I'm going to end the poll. I'll post the results right now. There you go.
All right. So creativity is important for my work. Overwhelming yes. I consider myself creative. Yes. And my workplace encourage creativity. Very interesting. And I wonder if the response was influenced by the current crisis. In other words, that because we are finding ourselves in completely unfamiliar territory, we now understand the importance of creativity. Because take a look at this poll that was conducted of 100,000 people in different industries and how they responded to the same question. Almost all of them said that creativity is important for their work. So they're with you on that. So that is a consistent perspective. But look at this. Less than half thought of themselves as creative. In other words, that I'm not really the creative type, or that's not something that I really harness personally. And only 2% said that their workplace encourages creativity. So there's actually a huge disconnect between what people think about the importance of creativity and, in fact, how it is utilized in the workplace. So building on that, just a couple of words of inspiration from some of the greatest minds of the past. Albert Einstein had this wonderful quote that said the following: imagination is everything. It is the preview of life's coming attractions. And what a beautiful statement, and how true for us when we see that a new normal is taking shape. So this is our perfect opportunity to create the coming attractions of the future, to be one of the future shapers. Thomas Edison, who is considered one of the greatest inventors of all time, was once asked by a reporter, "Mr. Edison, what do you think? What do you consider to be the greatest invention of all time?" And his response, without any hesitation, was, "The greatest invention of all time is the mind of a child." Okay? What a wonderful answer. And let me illustrate that by just a quick story from my own childhood. And this was told to me by my parents, that apparently when I was about 2.5 years old, I was playing with small matchbox cars, pushing them around on a coffee table. And out of the corner of my eye, I caught a fly landing at the edge of the coffee table. And perhaps I've never seen a fly before up close. I reached out to touch it. The fly, of course, disappeared. And my reaction was to look under the coffee table to see where it went, okay? Because that's what I was accustomed to doing. And of course, I didn't see it there. This happened 2 or 3 times, the same process. The fly landed, I reached out, it disappeared. I looked under the table, nothing there. Until the 4th or 5th time, when the fly disappeared, I looked around. I didn't look down and saw the fly on the wall. Now, think about that for a moment. On one side, how trivial this little scenario was, and how this happened to all of us and many times over as we were children. But from another other perspective, how incredibly empowering this was, and what a big new moment it was in the way that I saw the world. This presented me with an entire new paradigm shift, the way that I understood my environment to work, and how I now see it working. And that sort of openness, that sort of receptivity to new ideas and curiosity about always looking around our environment is why Thomas Edison would say that the mind of a child is the key to inventing. And this is also resonated by a more recent observation. Peter Meinholz is a leading user experience expert who said, everything you need to know about innovation you learned in kindergarten. So that that perspective, that way of exploring and curiosity, that's what it's all about. And that's what we want to hang on to and retain, and then now understand how to systematically apply. So the slingshot process is one that I like to just very quickly introduce to you in terms of how it helps you to systematically apply creativity as the driving engine of putting you in charge of the new normal. So Blue Ocean Strategy, I assume that some, if perhaps most of you have heard or even tried to apply the concept, is something very close to me. I was one of the core original experts of the concept. And of course, Blue Ocean Strategy is all about disruption. It's all about this notion that in an environment, you have the option of either being in the red ocean, where everybody competes in a known space and try to outcompete each other, or you can break away and create your own market space where your offering, your customer value is so compelling that you have that space all to yourself. So it's a beautiful imagery, a wonderful concept, but in practice, in over 10 years of being a blue oceanographer and helping companies understand and apply it, this is the strange phenomena that I found. That everybody wanted to be in the blue, the inviting, calm, money-filled opportunity and profit-filled waters, and get away from the shark-infested red waters, but they were stuck in the middle. They couldn't quite make that transition. And the reason for that is this, that most companies saw blue ocean as being dangerous, as being risky, as going into completely new territory. And when presented this way, they pulled back. They didn't want to risk everything. So they rather keep in the red ocean, even though it's more competitive and risk becoming obsolete, than do something new. And in order to address this dilemma, in order to give companies the right mechanism to give them comfort to actually explore and get into the blue waters, that was the background for creating Slingshot, okay? So Slingshot, in essence, is the practical application of Blue Ocean Strategy. It's a way to continuously reimagine boundaries. And at the very core of Slingshot is a very simple question. What do people want? What do people want in life? Because at the end of every business transaction, every business offering, whether you're a heavy industry company, B2B or B2C, are people, are human beings. And what you want to know is what really matters to them in life. And there's a convergence of that. So our answer to this question is fairly similar. And I love the answer provided by a former Army psychologist who said the following: the human equation is to multiply joy and divide pain. Pain shared is pain is pain divided. Joy shared is joy multiplied. I think it's a beautiful statement and really a manifesto for any business. Because what I say is that what any business should be in the business of is multiplying joy and dividing pain for their constituents, for your customers. And the second part about sharing in the pain, understanding what bothers your customers, as well as celebrating what you do for them to create and bring them joy, is equally important. And again, think about how relevant this is to the current position where people are feeling all kinds of new pain, and they're more than ever desperate to have some sort of joy shared with them, to have new sources of delight. And as the new normal forms, there'll be all kinds of new opportunities to identify new sources of pain that can be then transformed. So what Slingshot does is to create a framework where we can harness our creativity, right, in a systematic way to do what? To identify customer pain points and to transform them into points of delight and joy. That's our mission as a company, to identify customer pain points, not just fix them, but transform them so that the worst part of their experience becomes the best. And to do that, we can harness our creativity. And a couple of ways we can do that is, number one, always stretch the definition of our business. So just like Samsung doesn't think of itself as being in the business of a consumer electronics company, but being in the business of life care, always you can do the same of how you define what you do. And the other is to take advantage of what I call the innovation shortcut, which is this idea that you never need to invent anything or develop anything that hasn't been done before, but rather to find new combinations of already existing components that unlock new value. And again, during a crisis, this is really empowering because it's not about getting more resources, it's understanding how to use your current resources inside and outside your company in new ways. So with that, now let's dig specifically in how to do that during the crisis. So what we want to do right now is to identify new market opportunities in a way that minimizes our resources, keeps our staff engaged and motivated. So a question for you on that. How good do you think companies are in removing pain points, right? That was a key tenet of the whole slingshot framework, to say that if what people want in life is to maximize joy and minimize pain, then companies should be in the business of delivering on that, of transforming, eliminating pain points and turning them into points of delight and joy. So the question is, how good do you think companies are in removing customer pain points? Not even transforming, but just simply removing, okay? Well, if we look at a couple of the great minds of our business community, they were echoing the same sentiment as what I'm saying. Steve Jobs, you've got to start with the customer experience and work back to technology, not the other way around. And Bill Gates, your most unhappy customers are the greatest source of learning. So both of them are saying the same thing. It's all about looking at what you do from a customer perspective. And when there is discomfort, there's frustration, that's your cue. That's your key to learning and understand how to evolve, pivot, change, reimagine your business. So now to answer the question, how good are companies at doing this? I think you'll be amazed by this statistic. In a single year, angry customers cost companies almost $6 trillion in the US. So this is just in the US. And this number represents over 1/3 of the entire output of the US economy. And you can see it impacted over half of all consumers who would rather go through the painful experience of switching suppliers than to continue to endure the pain that they were feeling. What pain were they feeling? Here it is. This is not rocket science. These are all the things that we also feel in relationship to the companies we do business with. Having to contact company too many times, waiting too long, inconsistent experiences, being promised one thing and delivered another, okay? So your mission, therefore, is to turn pain points into points of delight and joy. And this mission has special importance right now, during and after the crisis, precisely because there are all kinds of new pain points, new frustrations, new discomforts that are being formed and that need immediate attention currently. And in the new normal, where things are going to be very different in many, many ways, there'll be all kinds of new things that people will want, where B2B customers will want in a new way to help them transform points of pain into points of joy. And by understanding how bad companies are in general at doing this, if you can do this, then you'll be one of the future shapers. Then you'll be one of the few that will really be able to turn the crisis from adversity into opportunity. So one great example of that, again, that I referenced earlier was Groupon. So what Groupon tapped into is the pain point in the wake of the financial crisis, where people really felt very frugal, that they didn't have much money to spend. They were suffering financially. So the idea of being presented deals, of being presented promotions was really attractive, especially packaged in a really fun way. So people really looked forward to getting their daily infusion of Groupon deals. And that is this idea of turning a pain point into a point of delight. And on the other side, of course, they did this to their B2B customers as well, because local establishments, restaurants, fitness centers, health spas, love the idea of having a new way of reconnecting with local customers, which Groupon provided. Now, contrast that with this story a couple of weeks ago that two brothers in Tennessee at the cusp of the coronavirus crisis went out and amassed this huge stockpile of sanitizers and then proceeded to put them up on eBay and Amazon at outrageous prices, many, many multiples of their actual costs. And they were promptly, of course, disbarred and banned from online commerce and featured as a couple of guys who are trying to profit from everyone else's misery, in a sense. And there's a huge difference between the two of being seen as someone who's trying to capitalize on other people's pain versus being a company that understands their pain and helps them transform it into a point of delight and joy, like Groupon. Another example of that you may have seen in the news is British American Tobacco, who as a company or even as an industry, of course, is seen as a severe pain point because they represent something that was unhealthy, that was perhaps seen as being disingenuous and misinformant to customers who didn't really understand the full health effect of smoking. However, as a response to the crisis, look at what BAT is doing. They are actively working on and at the very front line of trying to find a solution to the COVID crisis. And they have already, in their laboratory, perfected a way of creating a vaccine, which is being tested right now for the virus. And what they're talking about is that fast-growing tobacco actually has some great qualities to make a vaccine available in a cheap and pure form, as well as something that could be used at room temperature. So they are able to pivot and say, here's our business, which has its own issues and has caused pain for customers. But what if we saw what we do completely differently? What if we can see what we're good at as being leveraged as a delivery platform for what people need and want most right now, which is an antidote or a vaccine for the virus that has halted business and life as we know it across the globe. So it's, again, a great example of reimagining boundaries and channeling what you can do in a creative way to address what people want most, transformed from a point of pain to a point of delight. Okay, and the last point of building on this mindset is now not only using creativity in a systematic way to look at what we're currently doing and even expanding its boundaries, but even wider. This is our opportunity to do that, to look at entire communities, to look at anywhere in the world and make those connections. And why this is the case is that, number one, as your staff and your team and you yourself are sitting at home, you actually have the time, which you may not have had before the crisis when everyone was fully busy doing just everyday work. Well, that is no longer the case. So we are now, in a sense, freed up like never before to really entertain creative ideas. And number two, because the normal, the status quo as we knew it, no longer exists, it necessarily kicks our creativity into high gear because we're forced to use it. Think back to my analogy of the three tourists. As soon as the third tourist was faced with this crisis, that's what prompted him to think, how do I put myself in control, and to take out a lighter and have the flames scare away the lion. That's your opportunity right now as well. So as a way of getting into this topic, question, can a giant cargo ship have fans? So perhaps you're a B2B company, and the question is, how can you create strong emotional bonds, not just with your direct clients, but with a online social media community in general? So Maersk, a Danish company, is the world's largest shipping company. And a couple of years ago, they decided to get on social media. And so they had just one person start a social media personality and content. So it was extremely fast and cheap. But within a short while, they created a massive social media following. So Maersk has over 3 million followers as a B2B heavy industry company, because as it turns out, people are fascinated by news in the high seas, whether it's marine life, it's weather, or piracy. Now, a couple of years ago, something of a crisis happened to Maersk. They accidentally hit a whale off the coast of Japan, which would have been normally a PR crisis for the company. But they used this social media voice and community to turn this crisis into opportunity. And so they gave the whale a virtual burial, they gave it a name, and then they announced on social media all the steps they would take to protect wildlife from that point on. So instead of being heavily criticized by animal rights activists, they were praised for their engagement. And that's the power of having and building a community that you are close with. And the crisis presents a wonderful opportunity to do just that. A more specific example of that is from T-Mobile US. So the CEO of T-Mobile in the US was John Laguerre, who is this extremely flamboyant personality. I'm sure you must have seen him in TV ads or billboards. He's always wearing pink, has long hair, wears a leather jacket. And in fact, he just stepped down as the CEO, a post that he had for 8 years. When he took over in 2012, the company was left for dead. So that was when AT&T's takeover failed, which was seen as the only lifeline for the company, because they were a distant fourth behind AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint, and they weren't seen as being able to catch up. But John Laguerre saw this as a challenge. So this crisis for him was a golden opportunity, in a sense, with nothing to lose. So he launched what he calls the Uncarrier campaign. So in everything he did, and T-Mobile stands for, they went against all the practices of the other three major carriers. And in a short while, they were able to spring past Sprint and get into third position. And now they're taking over Sprint to be able to rival AT&T and Verizon on an almost equal footing. And his whole Uncarrier campaign philosophy and strategy for the company was precisely to attack all the pain points that the other three major carriers were causing, such as really complicated contracts. So T-Mobile introduced very simple contracts, such as having angering limitations on usage, where you had to pay extra if you exceeded your limits. So T-Mobile introduced limitless policies, such as being restricted on how often you can upgrade your phone. T-Mobile made that easy and simple. So again, the same logic, if you can understand how to really look at what you do from a customer perspective, as simple and almost trivial as that seems, is the key differentiator, because most companies get that wrong. And John Laguerre himself has over 6.5 million followers on social media, because when you create this sort of campaign and personality, that has a personal resonance to people. And that's, again, a golden opportunity for any company during the crisis to form those bonds, to appeal to people as a beacon of hope, light, and common sense in a period where all of that is lacking. And when we look around, we see a lot of companies doing that. They're doing this well. So the Texas Roadhouse CEO, for example, announced that he's foregoing his annual salary to help other workers in the company who are suffering because of the crisis. and that's great, and many companies are doing that. LVMH, the leading French luxury company, announced that it's converting all of its cosmetic and perfume facilities to making large quantities of hand sanitizers for free. And for example, Apple CEO Tim Cook announced that they are making a substantial contribution for first responders in Italy. So as you can see, you have the ability to make a special bond with your company, within your company, with everyone that's working for you, with you, and their families. You can go beyond that, and a larger community, which could be your state or your country, like in the case of LVMH, or is a global citizen to go anywhere in the world and support those that are on the front lines, like Apple did in Italy. And that doesn't mean that you have to give them financial support. It could be any form of support in terms of know-how that you can contribute. So the final poll, I am curious about your beer drinking habits. So the options are three. Number one, do you drink beer? If you don't, then of course it doesn't apply to you. So that would be the first choice. Number two, if you are in fact a beer consumer, would you no longer drink Corona because of the virus, or at least would you stop currently? And number three, if you're a beer drinker, the virus would have no impact on your view of Corona as your choice of beer brand. So I'm curious which one you would choose out of these three. All right. So some of us are non-drinking beer drinkers. I know of those of us who are, most of us, over 2/3, are saying that the virus has no impact. So if I'm a Corona drinker, I will continue regardless of the current crisis. Great. So let's close that and talk about Corona beer for a moment. So you might have seen this kind of interesting headline a couple of weeks ago that 38% of beer drinking Americans would not buy Corona under any circumstances now. Now this the survey was heavily flawed, so it was not very objective, but that's not the point. The point is the kind of message that it's sending. What it's seeding is this notion that somehow Corona is less desirable as a brand, as a product, because of the virus, as a result of the obvious name association. There were even things in social media, false reports that Corona beer, in fact, contained elements of the coronavirus, okay? So the interesting point here is that, in my view, Corona beer is missing an absolute golden, one-in-a-lifetime opportunity as a result of this crisis. Corona has an online social media following of over 15 million people. Yet if you go to their Facebook page, there's not a single word about the crisis. There's nothing, no content. So they're trying to stay silent and make this whole crisis go away and hope that their name is not being, falsely connected to the virus. But contrast that with a mindset to say that, wow, this is our opportunity to shine. Corona can be at the very forefront of civic and corporate responsibility. They can be at the forefront of coordinating corporate efforts to help. Corona beer could donate 5% of sales to assist those most in need. And all these things would have exponential value to attract people to their brand and, of course, to their products. And one of the key things that made Corona such a global brand is their very kind of clever, attractive advertising, using bottles in different positioning to express different sentiments. So this photo of two beer cans or beer bottles leaning in as a symbol for Valentine's Day. They could have done the same thing during the crisis to show responsible social distancing and really put themselves at the forefront of how to respond as a highly caring and responsible corporation to the crisis. So this was a huge opportunity they missed. And contrast this with the response of Movement Mortgage. So Movement Mortgage was also a company created as a response to crisis. They started in 2008, and as their name suggests, it's all about reimagining the way that mortgage is done. They're the fastest growing mortgage company in the US, and what they're all about is transforming all the traditional pain points of customers applying for mortgages, as well as creating an internal environment of continuous creativity and fun. And this is their CEO, who's a former football NFL player, in fact, a Super Bowl champion. So he brings all that energy to the company. But look at the messaging from this video, how intimate, how personal it is, and how perfect it is capturing the concepts that I'm sharing with you, in contrast with the silence of Corona.
Hey, Movement team, you know, we've been talking a lot about adapting and overcoming, adapting and overcoming, adapting and overcoming in the face of adversity. Well, this market is creating a lot of adversity for a lot of people. And I tell you what, the obstacles that we're facing in the industry right now are going to separate the players from the pretenders. The players, they're the ones that are going to get up, adapt, and overcome. The pretenders, they're going to decide the cost is too high, the work is too much, or they don't have the means or the capability to adapt and overcome the obstacles our industry is throwing at us right now. Movement team, I want you to know you have a lead team that is committed to adapting and overcoming. We love adversity. We love adversity because adversity is an opportunity for us to separate ourselves from the competition. So wake up, know you are part of a winning team. We are waking up, adapting and overcoming to all the changing market conditions right now. I expect you to do the same. From our houses, get up, do our part for America by adapting and overcoming in this new volatile environment so that we can continue to serve American homeowners with excellence and help improve their financial positions in the midst of a tumultuous time. I love you. Keep at it. Keep leading with love.
Beautifully said. So that's exactly how you want to take ownership and take leadership of the current crisis and the new normal that will follow. So now let's summarize the wrap up. These are the 6 points that I shared with you, starting with this idea that to really embrace the current crisis as extreme disruption, then perpetual crisis mindset, understand that creativity is this wonderful and abundant and highly powerful resource that you can harness, then to channel that very systematically, for example, through the slingshot framework, and to do that now in a way that you can minimize your resource utilization, keep all your staff engaged and motivated, and then to look even beyond your current business and your current boundaries, because this is a golden opportunity to really capture a larger audience, a larger community that you can bond with. So in closing, I love this quote by Steve Denning, who wrote this in Forbes years ago. A firm doesn't find new ways to delight the customer, it creates them. So this is a very action-oriented mission statement that you have to create them, and this is a perfect moment for that. In strategic thinking, what we've learned is no such a thing as a mature industry, only an industry or market space where imagination hasn't been applied yet, and the crisis forces us to apply our imagination. And lastly, when imagination is applied from the perspective of the customer, the opportunities are boundless. And so this is the great moment in time that we can really embrace this sort of perspective. So lastly, a final image to leave with you. Imagine that it's the middle of winter, it's windy, it's snowing, it's getting dark, and you find yourself at the top of a mountain. You have ski equipment on, and the only way to get down to safety to the town below is through this slope in front of you. But as you look down, you see that the slope is extremely steep, icy, jagged, precipitous. It's way beyond your ability. But that's the only way down. So how will you approach it? What will be your mentality? Well, you have a couple of options. One is, as you start down, is to lean back. But if you lean back because you're afraid of the slope, that puts extra pressure on the back of your skis, which will cause you to accelerate out of control. The other option is to lean forward. And when you lean forward, you put pressure on the front of your skis, which allows you to be in control and master the descent. So my final message to you is to lean forward, lean into the crisis. Don't be afraid of it, master it, put yourself in control. And when you do that, you can seize the moment. So I wish you much success, of course, continued safety and good health during the crisis. And Brandon, if we have any time, I'd be very happy to entertain a couple of questions.
That's awesome, Gabor. Thank you. Yeah, people will hop off as they've got other meetings, but I've got some more time, and I know you do as well. So we'll keep it rolling with a couple questions. And for those of you who've got to go, thank you for joining us today. This will be recorded and will be posted back up to YouTube under the Conflux channel and sent out to everybody who registered. So Gabor, we had one question, which is, can you talk a little bit about doing this through emotional and physical exhaustion for people working in chaotic physical and interpersonal environments at home? So how are people innovating how do you recommend the process of going through this when their home right now is somewhat chaotic?
Yeah, that's of course a very very timely question, and that in itself is a whole new environment, and I can relate to that. As you, I am also at home and have the entire family here, four kids. So the idea, I would almost say, to use the concepts I just share with you as a way of finding the solution, right? Is in terms of what are the key pain points that you're finding in your home, right? Is it the lack of space, the lack of quiet, etc.? And how would you actually transform that so that you can make that a point of joy? One of the things, for example, is, let's say, children. So children you may see as highly distracting at this time. They may be, very loud. They may walk in and out of your webinars, etc. But one of the wonderful things about children is that they will reawaken exactly the kind of thinking that I am suggesting that you adopt, right? That childhood sense of exploration and adventure. So one of the great advantages of our predicament right now is that we are in close quarters with our children, so we can again observe their way of thinking much more directly than any other time. And if we actually immerse ourselves in that, that would be a wonderful way to reignite this way of thinking. So that's just one example of perhaps what people are facing, is that instead of looking at your children as a distraction or as a detraction from your ability to do business, look at them as a source of guidance on how they are looking at what they do, and adopt that for the way that you use your creativity. So that's really perhaps a useful kind of example of how I am dealing with it, and how I suggest you do as well.
I got another question. How would you recommend applying these principles for someone who's looking to find a new career in the midst of this new business environment?
Right. So new career on a personal level, I think, is also similar to the way a business should look at the new environment. So you have certain skills, you have certain know-how, and what you want to do is understand which way the world is shifting, right? And you want to be one of the first ones in that space. So if you can make your skills and know-how available, obviously through remote channels, that's of immediate applicability and interest to people. But it's, again, your thinking should be about what will be the new pain points during the crisis and after the crisis that is somehow closest to your skill set, and how can you be one of the first in that space to be able to transform those pain points, right? So right now it's a great opportunity to just share content. So share your knowledge about certain topics that you think people really care about, give it away for free, and then build off that community that will be formed. I also love the quote that Wayne Gretzky had in terms of, being the greatest hockey player of all time by far. And he was asked, what makes you so great? And he said, well, it's simple. I skate where I think the puck is going to rather than where the puck is, right? And that made all the difference. And so that's our ability right now, either as a company or as individuals, is to think about which way lifestyles are going and work styles are going, and be one of the first ones in that space.
And Gabor, I got one last question for you, and that's besides the obvious answer of just ask them, how do you recommend people go about uncovering those pain points for their customers? So besides
Yes,
the obvious of, hey, just ask them, but how would you recommend they go about finding those pain points?
absolutely. And in fact, I would go beyond asking them. So asking them actually limits you to only understanding what they think could be done, right? Because their mindset is also kind of limited by what is available. This is why Henry Ford said, if I asked what a customers want, they would have said a faster horse, right? They couldn't imagine an automobile. And Steve Jobs, he was famous for saying the same thing, that it's up to us to imagine what the customer wants, and they will then come to it if they find it attractive. So the best way is to observe, right? Is to observe customers and go through the customer experience yourself. Don't just ask. Use all 5 senses and try to go through the customer experience yourself. So one of the things that you may watch reruns of that I think are on TV is Undercover Boss. I think it's a great show because what it does, it puts a leader in a position to see their operations from a completely different perspective. Someone coming in at the bottom of their organization and interacting with people who are on the front line with the company's customers, right? And I think it's a fascinating dynamic. And that I think will also give you ideas on how you can discover new customer pain points of your customers.
Then we've got one other question here of what implications does Blue Ocean have for leadership in the current world where our teammates and our customers are all remote?
Are all remote? Well, I think Blue Ocean strategy, one of the key things it talks about is this idea of how do you let go of certain factors of competition as well as add or increase how good you are on certain others, right? So this is this combination of both eliminating and reducing factors of competition, which leads to cost savings, as well as increase on the focus of those factors of competition that customers truly value, right? That's the basic value innovation premise of Blue Ocean strategy. So the notion is, here we are in a new environment where all of a sudden the idea of being physically close to customers or physically close to our teammates, our colleagues, is eliminated or greatly reduced as a factor of competition. So the question is, what replaces that, right? And that I think is a question for every company right now to ask. Are we able to create new delivery systems so that we can all continue to work remotely and interact with our customers remotely? Or after the current quarantine is lifted, are we able to go back in some form to what we did before? So I think the way that I would apply Blue Ocean strategy is exactly that, is to consider this now a new normal where a factor of competition, physical closeness to our colleagues and customers, is greatly reduced or even eliminated. And how do we deal with that? What do we replace that with to be able to deliver our know-how and our offerings? And the one last thing I would add, unless, I don't know, Brandon, if you were going to mention this in a closing, is that I am also doing master classes online. So if you like this content, which was mostly about the mindset, that the right way of thinking, given our time limit, then one of the things that you may be interested in is my master class, which is about the application, the direct application of these concepts to your business.
You took my last point on my sticky note that I had right there. So that's perfect. Thanks. Yeah, so we will be sending out, I'll get a link from you, Gabor, and we'll be sending out that link out to everybody on here so that they can find out about it. So with that, Gabor, that did not disappoint. You crushed it as usual, my friend. You crammed a whole lot of information into a very short amount of time. thank you so much for you to join us. Thank you everybody here for hopping on.